We've all sold our soul to the fiat.
We have. We've sold ourselves out. And you get sort of like very disingenuous arguments from people like Sam Harris, and they think they're being all clever. It's like arguments refuted 1,500 years ago. The Fed has never been audited, right? Like, we have no idea what they're doing and who they're bailing out and what sort of crazy shenanigans go on behind the scenes.
Fiat ruins everything.
It does. It does. It really does.
How many books have you written at this point?
5.
Jesus Christ. Oh, no offense. So you are being stolen from. Your money is being debased. Your labor is being debased. Your civilization and all of its institutions are being debased. That's scary.
I love the cover because that is Benjamin Franklin on the $100 bill with the clown. So it's like Clown World.
It's actually sad. These amazing human beings in Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson.
Andrew Jackson. He destroyed the second bank of the United States, and he's on the 20. He'd be rolling in his grave if he knew he was on a Federal Reserve note.
All right, so Jimmy, to kick this off, let's talk about your hat. In what year did you start wearing a hat everywhere you go?
2017. It's become a part of my branding, I guess. And it was mostly to get people to notice that I'm from Texas.
Well, you're from New Jersey.
Well, originally, but Texas is my adopted state.
You completely embraced it.
I have. I want people to know that Texas is a great place to be. And I think it's worked. There's a lot of Bitcoiners here in Austin now. So
if your younger self could see you from middle school and high school, what would they think about both the embracing of Texas and also just the hat?
Yeah, I think I would be probably kind of confused how I arrived at that future self. Because I was a very different person, obviously, back then. I mean, I can't imagine many people were very similar to their middle school selves.
I don't know. Like, I feel like I would connect with myself, but be like annoyed with myself. That version of me, like, I would understand him maybe a little too much still. I mean, I have still some major growing up to do.
Yeah, I didn't enjoy middle school, so I would probably try to say words of encouragement to the middle school me, but the middle school me would be very confused about what I look like.
Did you enjoy grade school or?
Well, grade school was okay. It was middle school that was hard just because it was public school. Academics were just kind of, I wasn't really learning anything. Socially, it was extremely awkward. So middle school just wasn't very fun.
Did you have a group of friends?
I had them in 7th grade, and then they all abandoned me by 8th. So that was a little bit hurtful.
Why did they abandon you?
I'm not sure. I guess I wasn't cool enough or something. I was kind of known as a nerd at that time, too. So maybe that was it. Maybe that's part of the job.
What were you into? What were your interests?
Computers, not a surprise, right? Given what I do. Video games, stuff like that. I mean, stuff that kids are into now, and I don't think it would be controversial at all at this age, But this was back in 1988, 89. So I guess maybe back then it was a little bit more strange.
Yeah. What was the technology that was available to you then?
I was a PC gamer. I was playing stuff like Sierra Online games, King's Quest, Police Quest, Space Quest, stuff like that. And not that many people knew what those things were. I mean, if they were playing any video games at all, it was like the Nintendo Entertainment System. And it's a little different, yeah.
Did you ever get into non-technological nerd stuff like Magic the Gathering or?
That was later. That didn't come out until I was in college. So I did play a little bit of that, but that was a long time ago. I've had to give up most of those things because I get addicted to pretty much any kind of game. So I just don't play them anymore.
You were obviously into technology early. Is that when you picked up your ability to code and teach yourself how to code, or?
So I got into computers back when I was 9 years old. We had a computer in the back of the classroom, and I was a recent immigrant. So a lot of the time when the teacher was teaching English or something, I would go to the back, and I had my ESL class at some other time. So go to the back and play with the computer, whatever it was. I didn't really know what those things were, so if I remember, it was like a pet computer, and you had like cassette tapes that you had to insert to load a program. And I think the first thing that they had was like Logo or something, and I wanted to know how to manipulate it or whatever. They didn't really teach anything about it, but the program was there enough so that I got a conception of like what you could do by programming. And I asked my dad for a computer, and he got me one from Toys R Us, the Commodore 16. And unfortunately, that was the computer with no games. The Commodore 64 had amazing games. It had like hundreds of games, actually. And you could copy it from a friend. And, my friends that had a great time.
So that's why they ditched you.
Well, they didn't have that computer then. So Commodore 64 was a little bit later, but I had the 16. It had one cartridge game and then like text-based games, which I wasn't interested in. So I ended up learning how to program. And, Line Basic was the first computer programming language I learned.
So you owe your dad everything for not letting you be distracted
Yeah.
by the games.
Well, eventually I got like a Sega Master System, so I was playing video games there.
But you were already learning to code
Yeah.
because you weren't being distracted. Maybe had you been exposed to those games, you would have never learned to code.
Possibly. I mean, my parents kind of pushed me in that direction, given my interest in it. And I don't think they knew what they were doing, but somehow they found some people to teach me stuff. So my mom, for example, found some pregnant woman that had graduated with a computer science degree, and she was teaching nobody else but me and my sister. And we would go there like every Wednesday or something. I have no idea how she found this woman.
That's wild.
And she would teach me stuff, and you can have variables that aren't just numbers. They can have strings, and you could place them and do all this stuff. And I remember making some sort of program that was like a very rudimentary interface, and creating something. That was sort of the beginning of everything, I guess.
I can't imagine that your parents, as recent immigrants, were just encouraging your coding simply because it was where your heart was. Had you been like into theater, they wouldn't have been like, yo, we're going to go all in on your theater passions.
Well, I guess they saw that the computer stuff was the future, so they wanted to encourage it. And I mean, I was very happy to do that. And by the time I got to high school and, started taking like CS classes in high school, I was near the bleeding edge already, right? Like I had gotten like a 486, 33 megahertz. I still remember. Great computer. It cost my dad a lot of money. I think he had to take out a loan even to afford it or whatever. But that was it.
I love your memory of this pregnant coding teacher.
Yeah.
and she's like obviously was only pregnant for a finite amount of time.
Yeah. Actually, the one day we went and her sister came out and said she had the baby, and then we never saw her again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's just, but those few months when I learned from her, I actually learned quite a bit. And
Have you tried to find this lady?
I have no, and I asked my mom, like, how'd you find this lady? Like, you were a recent immigrant. How do you even know to ask for something like this? She's like, I don't remember. I just she just found somebody, started taking lessons. She paid her some amount of money, and I remember she was doing early networking stuff while I was coding, right? Like, this is in the late 80s, early 90s. That was my first exposure, and I got it fairly early, and it's been a part of my existence ever since.
Yeah, it never left you.
No.
And did you have other interests, or was this basically...
Well, computers, math was the big one. I mean, through college, I thought I was going to be a math professor, and I didn't do a line of code in college. I did a lot in high school, and like my friends knew me as a coding geek, I guess. But I went to college and I studied pure math because I love math. But yeah, I found out that the road to becoming a professor is pretty lonely. It's hard and arduous and not very social. And I mean, you know me. I'm pretty extroverted. I need a lot of people around me, so I just didn't think that was the direction to go. And when a friend of mine from high school called me up to join his internet startup, I said, "Okay, let's go." And that was 1998, and I moved to Boston the next week. It was kind of that's how I got my start in the industry, I guess.
The way you say I love math, it's awesome. Also, like your parents must have really loved that. Immigrants coming over being like, our kid loves math. My God. Were they encouraging you? Did you actually accept their encouragement? How was that? Because a lot of times you hear about kids in your situation whose parents make them get into math and they feel forced and they get good at it because it's just been forced upon them, but it's not because they actually loved it.
No, I love math, and I love math contests. I did a lot of math contests in high school, and I did pretty well on a lot of them. I don't know. It gave me sort of like a perspective into truth that I didn't think that a lot of other subjects gave, because a lot of it is very subjective and arbitrary.
Well, math is becoming subjective,
2 + 2 = 5. So.
Well, it could, right?
Right? Yeah, that's what I always appreciated about math. A theorem proven 2,000 years ago is still true,
Right.
but some biological discovery like upends everything about what we know from the past or something. There's always sort of like new paradigms coming in almost every other area of knowledge, whereas this was like permanent, and it was you could prove that it's true, which you really can't in anything else. You can know with like very high level of certainty that gravity exists and stuff like that, but we don't really know the exact mechanism of any of that stuff. And we can theorize, but those theories probably go away once some other discovery is made and so on. So
I think truth seeking is probably a fairly common theme throughout your life. If you're already excited about math for that reason as a kid, you get into coding. Were you raised in going to church, or was this something that you found later on?
I started going to church when I was 5, and I remember my mom and dad didn't, but my grandmother had convinced her to send me and my sister to church because she thought it would be good for all of
In New Jersey?
No, this was in Korea. I was a 5-year-old in Korea, and I still remember the very first time my mom walked me to the church, which was in the neighborhood, and she asked me if I could find my way home, and I said yes, and she left. And my sister and I just went into the church and did whatever, and then came back. So that was my first experience. We did that every Sunday from then on until we moved to the U.S. I immigrated when I was 8. And then my parents started going because they wanted a place to meet other Korean people. So that's what happened.
That's really interesting. So do you remember becoming someone who had faith at the age of 5, or was that something that came later?
I would say a little later. At the beginning, you don't really know what's going on, right? Especially if you're going there without your parents, right? It was a little bit of a strange thing, but I still remember memorizing like Matthew 4:4 or something like that.
What's Matthew 4:4?
I knew it in Korean, but it's when the devil is tempting Jesus, and I think it's like man does not live by bread alone, something like that. So that's what I remember doing. But I would say that my faith matured a little bit more when I was around 9. We went to a Christian overnight summer camp called Word of Life in upstate New York. I guess in Christianese that's when I came to the Lord. Yeah.
So you moved from Korea when you were 8.
I was.
Are there any cultural things about Korea that you missed and still miss to this day that you wish America had?
That's a good question, because in a sense, what happens to a lot of immigrants, and this is something that I've talked about with other immigrants, is that time sort of freezes, right, when you move. So for my parents and for me, the Korea that we think of is 1985 Korea, because that's when, they immigrated. The thing is, Korea keeps moving, and it's a very different Korea than later. Funny story that I like to tell people is I never tasted a banana until I got to the United States. And that surprises people because they think bananas are everywhere. And it is now, and you can go buy bananas in the grocery store in Korea. In fact, you could do that as early as like 1988 or whatever. But when I was growing up, they didn't have bananas. I had heard from other people how amazing this fruit was, how delicious it was, and I wanted to try it so bad. But of course, there were no bananas. And as soon as we got to America, I tried a banana. I was like, this is pretty good. I'd also never had a pizza before, right? That was not something that was available in Korea. Of course, like when we visited Korea like 3 years later, all of that stuff was available. Like that's how quickly Korea more or less globalized. From 1985 to 88, just everything came online. But back then, I had no idea. So it's kind of a different world that you leave. So when you ask a question like what do you miss or something like that, it's hard to disassemble what's culture.
There must be certain things that may have been, like for instance, you can correct me if I'm wrong, having never lived in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be more of a culture of kind of collectivism.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be more of a culture of shame.
Mm-hmm.
Of people kind of feeling ashamed on behalf of other Koreans,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're businesses or government, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things I always find to be really interesting when I hear about the Korean experience. Do you think that America could use more of it, or is it healthy that we don't have those things?
I mean, it's hard to say because you don't really know. And in a sense, I never missed them because I was still in a Korean American sort of community for a large portion of my childhood at my church and stuff like that. Now, could the U.S. benefit from some of the cultural things that Korea has and vice versa? Absolutely. What could they be? It's hard for me to say because like there's good and bad of everything, and you can't just pick and choose little cultural things because with it comes something bad usually, and with something bad comes something good too. There's, for example, a very deep conformity, right, within Asian culture that can be very bad because individual expression is hard, and people are more afraid of stepping out of line or having different opinions and so on. But at the same time, it keeps a society very cohesive, and that can be very good, especially if you need sort of the national unity to go do something. So it's hard for me to say because there are good and bad or there's good and bad to almost everything.
Yeah, I mean, I've been at least one event with you where you speak out and you argue with people pretty openly and aggressively. Clearly, that didn't stick for you. Do you have a moment in your life where you remember feeling courageous enough to speak out and go against the grain?
I'm kind of a contrarian by nature, so in that sense, I'm not very Asian. I guess the very Asian thing to do. I hate making stereotypes.
Yeah, stop being racist, man.
Yeah, against my own people. But it's to sort of follow the rules a lot and sort of progress down.
Love math.
Yeah, well, or do the college thing and go down the doctor, lawyer, investment banker route or something like that. I was never really good at that, which is a little bit strange. But that's, one of the blessings in my life is that I was in an area of the world where that is kind of rewarded. I've been the beneficiary of that because I didn't go down the traditional path and I still made it. So, yeah.
But then you got to Texas at some point.
Uh-huh.
What brought you here?
That was more a financial decision. My wife was pregnant with our fourth kid at the time. We were both working. We realized like it wasn't sustainable for both of us to work, and we weren't going to be able to raise our kids properly if we just kept both working. So we wanted to find a place where we could move, where she could stay at home and take care of the kids. And so being a programmer, I looked for the best salary to cost of living ratio, and I think the two places that came up were the Triangle area in North Carolina and Austin, Texas, and we chose Austin, Texas.
And you've now embraced the whole Texas vibe fully. It's part of your brand.
Yes.
What about Texas? What do you love about this place?
I came from Boston, so to contrast that a little bit, Massachusetts is obviously very liberal, very sort of like elitist almost, right? You have a lot of schools that produce a lot of these elite Washington, D.C. types. In my heart of hearts, I've always been very libertarian and wanting freedom and so on. And Texas for me was that kind of state. Now, I moved to Austin, which is probably the most liberal city within Texas itself. But, that said, it's still part of Texas, still part of that free-spirited sort of Wild West almost kind of vibe that I was looking for. And that those kinds of values of...
I think Austin's misunderstood because I think Austin has a libertarian spirit, even for the people that consistently vote totalitarian left. For me, it's apparent. Whenever you start talking to people, they really are live and let live here. And I think that generally is a Texan characteristic, although I've never lived in the deep red parts of Texas, so I can't speak to that. Mm-hmm. Christianity is often very maligned in our modern world. Mm-hmm. Not so much in Austin as other blue cities that I've lived in, but it's still somewhat maligned. Why do you think that is? And how would you communicate your relationship with Christianity to a layman who doesn't understand the religion?
Yeah, so I actually wrote about that a little bit because there is sort of like a denigration of family, which I talk about in the book. But certainly that's also the case with respect to religion. And I think it's like a very purposeful thing, especially as we get more and more socialist. And if you study sort of like the progress of Marxism and cultural Marxism in particular with the Frankfurt School and its penetration into academia, media, and Hollywood, it's all purposeful. All of those institutions had like outright communists that were reporting straight to Moscow, and they wanted to break the bonds of family and your church and things like that. That mentality has seeped into sort of like the elite left circles, and It's been there for quite a while. It's just becoming more apparent and they're being more overt about it. And you get sort of like very disingenuous arguments from people like Sam Harris, and they think they're being all clever. It's like arguments refuted 1,500 years ago. But this is sort of like the zeitgeist, and unfortunately for people within that elite circle, any form of Christianity in particular is very much denigrated, and maybe Buddhism is okay or something like that, but it's a very it's the basis of modern civilization, and really I think what they don't like are the restrictions of civilization, particularly around sexual stuff, which unfortunately has meant that we get sort of the degeneracy that we see today.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a fan of Sam Harris's. I still kind of am. I will listen to his podcasts. I have my own critiques of him as of late. What in particular, because you sort of touched upon the Sam Harris critique, but what specifically would you critique him for?
So a lot of it are straw men that he knocks down. He's not really honest with his critique, and you can kind of see that more recently with some of the rationalizations he's making with regard to COVID and so on. We would have been right had reality been different, is like sort of the argument he's giving. If you actually studied theology, if you studied Aquinas or even Plato and Aristotle, they made arguments for God that he completely ignores. And that's basically the issue I have with new atheists. They come from sort of like an anti-historical perspective of, if we didn't make there is nothing before the Enlightenment or something like that.
Yeah, they kind of make arguments as though there's no secular case for God. There's a lot of atheists who are very pro-religion, specifically Christianity and the Judeo-Christian traditions. They make a lot of great arguments about why it's a good idea. My critique about Sam Harris is I think that he doesn't realize how smug he is. And he always talks about how everyone's very arrogant. And it's like, dude, he's a very arrogant man who thinks very highly of himself, and sometimes with good reason, other times not so much. He has a lot of trust for authority, or at least he wants everyone else to have a lot of trust for institutional authority. And he thinks that any challenges towards institutional authority, even when legitimate, delegitimize sort of this feeling that all of society should still have respect for institutions, otherwise everything will break down. And there's some truth to that, but I think that he's gone a little bit too far in that sort of defense of institutions direction.
And he comes from an intellectual tradition that really starts from the Enlightenment, and much like the humanists of that era, he wants all of the Christian morality without God. That's where I think pretty much all atheist arguments fall short, is that you have no basis for morality. And touch on this a little bit in the book, but the only real atheist that is, I guess, courageous enough to embrace atheism for all it is Nietzsche. And his morality is literally sociopathic. It is just will to power, the powerful get to rule over the weak, and so on.
He also lamented about the fact that God was dead.
Yeah. And the God is dead thing is very misunderstood, because he was basically making fun of all the Enlightenment thinkers. What do we do when we're untethered from the sun? You have no idea what you have unleashed as a result of killing God, and he's been right. We're seeing sort of like the absolute craziness of the discourse. It's not based on rational thinking at all. It's just rationalizing whatever people want. It's gotten really crazy.
And then you have the hyper-atheist people who consider themselves to be hyper-rational, kind of making these arguments that appear to be hyper-rational and aren't. And at the same time, they're expecting everyone to be Vulcans in society. Like Sam Harris is basically a Vulcan. And that's why I kind of like listening to him, because he has very interesting insights. But it's like, we're not all Vulcans. And we have another side to humanity that he doesn't seem to recognize as an important part of being human. But also, to your earlier point, there's a lot of philosophers that try really hard to kind of create morality absent theology, and they always fall short. And they admit to falling short, but they then create a faith within their philosophical constructs, thinking there must be a way to complete this. And they obsess over trying to complete it, and they can't. And it's like, That's called religion.
Yeah, well, they're all trying to go from is to ought, and they're realizing what ancient philosophers already realized. You can't go from is to ought. That is not a bridge you can cross. What you said reminded me of basically Keynesian economics. They all assume hyper-rational beings, Homo economicus. Oh, how is anyone going to spend if we have a deflationary economy? It's like, duh, we need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to do things, and those things cost money. Of course, we're going to spend money. But for them, their model is that everyone is Homo economicus, and they can prolong any kind of suffering in order to make more money, which is obviously ridiculous.
And by the way, the critique I have of Sam Harris with his sort of faith in institutions is basically the antithesis of the arguments you make with regard to complete distrust with regard to centralized authority. So when did you get into Bitcoin?
2011. I was reading a story on a tech news site. It's called Slashdot. It still exists, but it's not nearly as popular as it used to be. And I saw a story that said, internet-only currency Bitcoin has reached dollar parity. This was February of 2011. I still remember reading it and thinking, what the hell is this thing? Because I had no idea. Everything else on that website I knew something about, or I had an idea of what the story was about. This one just, I had no idea. I was completely confused. So I looked into it and I discovered fairly quickly that there's a 21 million cap limit. And I remember thinking immediately, if this gets popular, I better be one of the first people to get it and not one of the last. And I remember telling my wife about it when I got home that night. I remember sort of looking into how to buy one, and I couldn't get it with PayPal or credit card or anything. So I was like, how do I get this thing? The only place I could find was an exchange in Japan called Mt. Gox, and it was a little bit of a trek to get money into Mt. Gox because you had to transfer it through a money transmitter. This other company called Dwala. You had to hook up your bank account to Dwala. Confirm the 2 small deposits that they make, which takes like a week. And then you had to hook in your Dwala account with your Mt. Gox account. And then finally, when all of that is there, then you could buy it. And I thought it was too much work, so I didn't buy any.
No.
At $1, yeah.
That's so sad.
Yeah, everyone has their Bitcoin regret stories, though. I'm sure you do. When you first heard about it, you wish you could have gotten in, something like that.
I mean, no.
No? When did you first hear about Bitcoin?
I remember seeing a magazine, like a Time magazine or Newsweek. It felt to me like a Beanie Baby craze for bros. And to this day, I still sometimes wonder if that's somewhat true.
Certainly of altcoins and stuff like that. Bitcoin's a little different, but yeah, I mean, that's the reaction a lot of people had, yeah.
But your failure to buy the coin is an interesting story. So what year was this?
2011.
When were we starting to finally be able to transact?
I mean, later that year. That summer, it went from $1 to 30, and Wired had this article saying, "Is Bitcoin dead?" First of many, many articles on the death of Bitcoin. That was, to my knowledge, the first sort of like public conscious one, and that was sort of a watershed moment. But after that, I bought some, and yeah, I got into the coding aspect in 2013 after the first bubble of 2013 when it went from like $10 to $260 within a span of a few months, and then it crashed down to 50 again. And then later that year, we went from like 100 to 1,100 in like a period of 5 weeks.
So my interest in Bitcoin took off when I started to realize that there was a strong libertarian ethos connected to it, and it wasn't just necessarily just this crazy fad. I still to this day have not made any significant investments.
So you own Bitcoin, but not very much.
I think, yeah, like
okay.
Something tiny. The reason why I was excited about it is because I, like you, have a major distrust for centralized authority. Like we all read Lord of the Rings. We know that's not good. I also had a lot of smart friends who were starting to get into it. And so I started to really pay attention because when smart people start to get into something, it's probably somewhat meaningful. My biggest critique from then till today is not just the Beanie Baby for Bros critique. It's also that when big things happen in technology, the tangible world changes around us. We have these crazy devices that we carry around. Like you can see the world changing. And since the advent of Bitcoin, we haven't really seen physical changes with the world. and people's behaviors haven't been altered because of it. And that's been a big reason why I've been a little bit less excited about it. And obviously, you've heard this critique probably.
Yeah, I have. And the thing is, it is a little harder to see in a first world country. But, I was just in Nashville at the
Third world country, Nashville.
No, not. But it was a gathering organized by the Human Rights Foundation, and it was to talk to some of the human rights activists and all the different meetups around the world. For people in other countries, this is a lifesaver. So I have a friend, Anna Chekovich. She's the CFO for Navalny's organization. So if you don't know who Alexei Navalny is, he was the main opposition leader to Vladimir Putin. He was arrested. He's still in prison, but he started an organization, the Anti-Corruption Foundation, which was just trying to get them to not be so corrupt. Most of them have been kicked out, but there's a decent number of them that are still within Russia that sort of operate covertly. She's currently living in Lithuania. We've been talking to her about, like how to use Bitcoin and so on, because her organization has been completely financially deplatformed. Certainly within Russia, she tells this great story about how one day she went to her bank account and it said minus 1 billion rubles. So what? How do you get minus 1 billion rubles? Turned out that the authorities had seized their bank account, which happens to a lot of human rights organizations when you piss off, whoever is in charge of that stuff. So she's outside the country, and there's still people within Russia that want to support Navalny, who's again in prison. They want to oppose Vladimir Putin. How do you do it? Well, the entire Russian banking system is not going to be very friendly towards you. And in fact, their bank account is shut off, so they don't really have access to that. But they do have Bitcoin. Just to give you an idea, because they're Russian, they can't open accounts anywhere in Europe. The fact that they're Russian, despite the fact that they are opposed to Vladimir Putin, they can't open a bank account. They managed to find one in the U.S. that was willing to open one for them. And this is how they have to sort of deal with the fiat system. But this entire organization at this point runs on Bitcoin. The way it works is that if Russians want to give to this organization, they donate Bitcoin directly to this organization. They get the Bitcoin. And they also do payroll straight from Bitcoin. And this, obviously, Anna's the CFO. So she does this every month, where she gets the Bitcoin addresses of all the people that need to get paid and then pays them one by one. It's literally happening like that. This is an organization that would not have any other tools to affect change within Russia if they didn't have something like this.
Yeah, that's powerful. And then I can imagine there's developing nations in Africa and South America, Asia, that also rely on Bitcoin.
Yeah, especially the ones undergoing hyperinflation. So, Lebanon, Turkey, Argentina, a lot of these places where the dollar is king in a lot of those places because their local currency is so bad. But oftentimes, the dollar, physical cash is incredibly inconvenient. If you want to pay for anything online or something like that, gets very, very difficult. A lot of them are getting into Bitcoin. A lot of them end up using something like stable coins or Tether or something like that. They don't really recognize, Bitcoin as being as useful as Tether because they can basically have their own dollar bank account, which is really what they want because the dollar has been relatively stable. But yeah, it's not just those things. There's a lot of, you go to El Salvador, I went to Bitcoin Beach. And one of the first things you realize is that there are no credit cards there. Visa, MasterCard aren't opening anything there because it's not profitable for them. So they don't have any banking services or anything. They were telling me how if you wanted to get a mortgage, you can't. And even if you could, the bank is an hour and a half away by bus. And the only way you're going to be able to pay them is to go physically to the bank and give them cash. Now, no one's doing that, so they don't have access to mortgages, so they have to constantly rent. Now that they have Bitcoin, they're able to actually get a house. They have a mortgage, and there's some non-government organizations that are willing to lend them money and so on. And they pay with Bitcoin instead of sending somebody to go collect money or whatever. They can do it from their phone. They all have smartphones. It's just that there's no non-centralized, like non-governmental or non-Visa, MasterCard, U.S. Western banking system that lets them pay it.
And people obviously aren't seeing the things you just described,
Mhm.
and they're not as connected to those things or may not be aware of those things. But even if they were, if they don't experience it themselves, they might selfishly not care. There's this critique in America that we're basically trading this fiat system, right, the Fed, which has very little to no accountability, with something, if Bitcoin were to reign, that has even less accountability. Can you explain why Bitcoin actually would have more transparency, that would be actually less opaque than the Fed?
Yeah, well, first of all, the Fed has never been audited, right? Like we have no idea what they're doing and what swap lines they're opening with other central banks, who they're bailing out, and what sort of crazy shenanigans go on behind the scenes.
What? Just trust the Fed, man. Come on.
We don't even know who owns the Fed, right? Like it's just kind of like this weird quasi-public entity that is owned by some banks or something like that. We don't really even know.
It's the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, that movie is about the Fed, of course. You know this, right? Yeah. So it's.
But do you want to talk about that?
I mean, it's one of the most like brilliant sort of ways to teach people about the Fed without knowing that it is. The Emerald City is the dollar. The yellow brick road is gold. I think the scarecrow is like politicians or something. The Tin Man is like industrialists with no heart, right? And maybe it's the lion. The lion might be the politicians, complete cowards. And then the scarecrow is like farmers or something like that, just no brain. And that's the whole journey of, Dorothy going towards the Emerald City with gold and then finding out that there's no wizard behind the curtain. There's so many allegories within that about it, but it was really a critique of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sorry to take you off, but what were you saying before that?
So Fed has never, ever been audited. With Bitcoin, you can audit it by running your own software. Anyone in the world can audit Bitcoin at any time. You know exactly how many Bitcoin are available to be spent, what transactions happened in the last 10 minutes and so on. And the entire history of all transactions that have ever happened on Bitcoin, that's what's called the Bitcoin blockchain. It's the ledger. And you can audit it.
And this is what separates Bitcoin from other cryptocurrencies.
Well, the thing that separates Bitcoin from other cryptocurrencies is the fact that it's decentralized. There's no creator, there's no pre-mine, there's no central foundation that created the token, that distributed the token, that pre-sold the token to a bunch of VCs or whatever. It is Satoshi that created it, and then he left in 2010. Right, so it's very early on. It was the Genesis block is January of 2009. Satoshi disappears by October of 2010. So not on the scene for very, very long. And since then, it's been a decentralized network because there's no central authority that does anything. Everything is backwards compatible. A lot of these altcoins, they change the code and create new rules all the time, not unlike the Fed, like changing the emission schedule, as they call it, which is essentially changing how many new coins come in or out, which is exactly what the Fed does. So it's Fiat 2.0.
You're clearly passionate about this. You write books. This is your life. You're doing all these things. We live in Austin, and there were a ton of open crypto bros, right? There's less now. I used to go to events that were crypto events, or just whatever that was, whatever that time period was. And unlike you, a lot of people there would just use words like arbing things. They turn into a verb. And they didn't really care about the mission, right? They were just kind of trading and bragging about getting rich. That was a huge turnoff for me because it felt like a lot of the crypto world was being dominated by, or Bitcoin world was being dominated by that culture of people just wanting to have a quick way and easy way to make money. What is your perception of that culture within the Bitcoin world? Do you still feel like it's an important force to have to address?
Yeah, it definitely is. And part 6 of my book basically takes them to task for ruining the reputation of Bitcoin by associating with altcoins. And unfortunately, the incentives currently are such that there's a conflation with altcoins, Bitcoin and altcoins in this crypto market or whatever. VCs have a vested interest in doing that. Journalists have a vested interest in doing that. The altcoiners themselves have a vested interest in doing that because, in a sense, Bitcoin has been highly successful. It's been around for 14 and a half years now, and it's done fantastically well. So by even associating with Bitcoin, they get all of the reputational benefits that Bitcoin has earned with just robust uptime and all that stuff. And people think, oh, it sounds similar, and the media seems to be saying that they're similar, but they're nothing alike because it is issued by somebody, and it is exactly like what you were saying. It is a bunch of people defrauding others and making money that way. I mean, we have so many stories of this. It's not even funny. You got Celsius and Do Kwon and Luna and, of course, Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. And now CZ and Binance are looking like they're in trouble. But this is the game they've been playing. And this is why I call it Fiat 2.0. It's very much like what you would expect like a government bureaucrat or an investment banker to say, right? You talk to an investment banker, they could not care less about what they're trading.
It's almost sociopathic.
Yeah, they just want to arb and make money, right? Like, okay, I can get a couple bips here, a couple bips there. Like that's the culture that's been brought in, and this is why I call it Fiat 2.0. Really, the investment bankers, the Wall Street bros or whatever, they're Fiat 1.0. They don't care about anything other than making a profit. I think in a sense that's its own punishment because you go to New York, right, and you see how much they drink and do
coke,
drugs or whatever.
It's a vapid existence.
It is, because their existence means nothing and they're not contributing anything to society. So in a sense, the altcoiners have that same feel. It very much is a destructive thing. Bitcoin, thankfully, is very much opposite of that. And this is why, Bitcoiners are very adamant about separating the two, because you can't have both. You're not going to be arbing this and getting an airdrop and rug pulling these people or whatever and making lots of money and thinking that that's the same as sound money that can bring a savings technology to a world that doesn't have one.
Those terms just give me skin crawling in a very bad way. Just imagining the people that are saying it in my head and like the way they dress and act. It's funny, the way that I see these people too, and there's a Venn diagram crossover between them and faux-libertarians. Because there's libertarians who really just believe in decentralization. They understand the philosophy. They're well-read. And there's libertarians who just want to do tons of drugs, just moral-free sex or whatever. And you're like, that's all well and good, but that's not what libertarian means.
But yeah, to me, that's the difference between like left libertarian and right libertarian. You got the people that read Mises and Rothbard and like deeply think about societal incentives, and then you got people that just want to smoke weed and care more about like having abortion whenever they want and transgender rights or something. And it's very left libertarian to think about those things, but all of that is built on a civilization, and I don't know. For me, the right libertarians are thinking about building the building blocks.
As a secular person throughout my life, I'm a secular Jewish background, trying to figure out how to break into the faith mindset because it seems like a much healthier place to be for people who get there. The understanding I had of the Bitcoin, or the crypto, I should say crypto world, was exactly that. It's a bunch of people who don't believe in God very vehemently. And they say they're libertarians, but they really don't care about society. They just want to pull on that lever of hedonism as much as humanly possible. And it has nothing to do with creating a better society, which is insane to me. And it also sucks because it gives libertarians a terrible name. And everyone just imagines that they're these crazy people running around doing drugs. That said, I do, appreciate Burning Man. It was a lot of fun. I feel like you would actually like it. Maybe you can have like a math or crypto or Bitcoin. I'm sorry, Bitcoin. See, like, laymen like me, we conflate it the way that people conflate libertarianism.
This has been the sort of psyop that VCs and tech journalists have run over the last 5 years, is like conflating those two things.
Well, another thing that is important to color for people, I think, the fact that Bitcoin has enabled more nefarious kinds of transactions. The Silk Road is the most famous one. What other kinds of transactions have been enabled by Bitcoin?
There's the Backpage stuff, right? Where I guess you can pay prostitutes in Bitcoin or something. But they do this with the dollar too, with cash or whatever. Barclays got fined some insane amount of money for money laundering for drug cartels.
That's incredible, by the way, that happened. I think I read about that. Your argument is that there's no increase in nefarious activities because of the advent of Bitcoin. It's not like it's increasing crime that Bitcoin exists. It's not really enabling things. It's just another alternative way to pay for things.
Maybe it's made ransomware much more popular, right? So that's become a thing where, an entire electricity grid place is held hostage or something like that. This is part of the price of freedom, is that if you're going to let any two parties trade, right? In order to prevent that trade, you need to insert yourself as a third party, which the government does in a lot of transactions, unfortunately. Or you can give them freedom and they might do something that you don't like. And that does happen. I don't like the fact that ransomware exists. In a sense, its previous layers of software were much more lax in their security because of the fiat money that existed and the lack of methods for people to pay directly. Had Bitcoin existed earlier on, I think the software would have been a lot more secure. That's part of the price that we've had to pay for previously bad software. The bad stuff and good stuff almost always come together. The question is always about the trade-offs. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, you can get stolen from by thieves because, if you're holding your own keys, then the possibility that they can take the key away from you is always there. And, there are security setups that you can make that very difficult and so on, but it is always there. You could be responsible for your stuff. Or if somebody is always in a position to bail you out, well, they can also take away your stuff. And that's exactly what an authoritarian government does, like with the Anti-Corruption Foundation in Putin's Russia.
Yeah. Bitcoin had a moment during COVID when money was basically free, interest rates were low, right? And everyone was like, where do we put our money? Like Bitcoin, and then it went as high as 80,000. How high did it go?
68,000, I believe. Yeah. Yeah.
It dropped back down dramatically. Hype wore off. And now we're back in a place where it's gone back up again. It's kind of like, where is it now?
27,000.
Okay. So are you concerned about the deflation of the hype?
No, because we've gone through this before. And, I've already mentioned the first sort of real bubble was from $1 to $30 and back down to $2. 2016, it went from like $10, $266, back down to $50. And then later that year, it went from like $100, $1,100, back down to like $170, something like that. And of course, in 2017, it went from about $1,000 all the way up to 19,000 and came back down to, I think, 3,000 or so. And then our newest bubble from 2020 was 3,000 to 68,000, back down to I think at its lowest it was around 15. So you've had a lot of volatility, and that's to be expected in something new like this. And people are adopting it at different rates, and you have a supply side that is very predictable, and that's one of the beautiful parts of Bitcoin. But a demand side that is very volatile because it's dependent on Fed policy and so on. We've had economic contraction for like the last year. I mean, that definitely puts a crunch on cash, and a lot of people are opting to put it into government bonds because it's paying 5%, something like that. So you get different incentives, but yeah, I'm not worried at all.
You talk a lot about the things that are going wrong in society, and you write a lot about the failures that you think will happen or you believe will happen. What are the calamities that you think are imminent that we face in America? And then what do you think we should be prepared for over the next 5 years?
It's hard to say because there are levers that the Fed has control of that I have no insight into what levers that they're going to press. So they've been raising interest rates, and in that sense, it's been great because it's bringing a lot more rationality into the market. You can't just sort of float on zero interest loans and pretend reality doesn't exist anymore. Like, that's been the calling card of a lot of companies. We have a lot of zombie companies walking around that should not exist. They're not providing any value, and they're actually actively detracting. But higher interest rate environment means that a lot of that does go away, and we're seeing bankruptcies here and there, and even banks going bankrupt and so on. That's a good thing, that rationality entering into the market. But there's always this policy option of loosening. And that's something that a lot of people think will happen next year because of the election, to supercharge the economy right before, November when they vote. They feel like things are on the right track. Maybe they revote Biden or something like that.
It's the little man behind the Wizard of Oz is pro Biden.
We don't know. Or, maybe they're running the playbook from 1980 where they'll let rates get up to like 17, 18%, get all the cruft out of the economy and let it stay there for a while. But, there's so many things that are dependent on these rates that it's hard to believe that they can bring it up that high. As I look at this world, I see a lot of government spending. I'm sure you saw the latest numbers. We're now 33 trillion in debt, and this is an increase from like 31 trillion just a few months ago. We're spending like nobody's business. Part of that is because the money is contracting, and the businesses and corporate bonds and stuff like that, they're all kind of getting called in and they're not able to issue new ones. So the debt level is shrinking, which means that the money is contracting everywhere else. And in a sense, the spending of the government is meant to make up in some way for that. Except it's not really working. The economy itself is fluctuating, and there are a lot of businesses. You can make money if the interest rates are 3%, but once it gets to 5-6%, you're dead in the water. So you're seeing a lot of that. I don't know where this goes. I do think that some sort of hyperinflationary dollar event is eventually going to be there. Whether that happens 6 months from now or 5-10 years from now, I don't know. But we're getting towards the end of the juice that we can squeeze out of this lemon. They're trying to rehypothecate the lemon or something, but it's not really working.
I hadn't heard it put that way before. What do you think could actually stop Bitcoin from succeeding? What events or decisions could be made that would hinder this completely?
Obviously, there are sort of technical things like if ECDSA is broken, that's elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, which depends on the discrete log problem, which is a known very difficult problem in mathematics. That gets broken, then it's possible that a lot of other things break, but Bitcoin would be one of them. So a lot of websites would break, a lot of cryptography security would break. I don't think that's the case. I don't think we're anywhere near solving something like that, and just knowing the math behind it, it's incredibly difficult. The other possibility is there are certain hash algorithms that could be broken. The one that Bitcoin uses currently is SHA-256, which is in the SHA-2 family. If that gets broken somehow, then that could mean some serious turbulence. Might not necessarily kill Bitcoin, but it would be difficult to fix. Let's just put it that way. Once again, that seems very difficult, at least from what I know of the state of the art. It's been around for many years and it hasn't been broken yet. It's possible that some sort of government, like universal government crackdown happens all at once, but that's sort of like almost like a one world government scenario. I really don't see that either, but that is a possibility. So I guess I have to leave it around, say we enter into nuclear war and like one ruler over the entire world with like complete surveillance a la 1984 or something like that.
There's a lot of dark themes in your work, right? And you have 4 kids.
6.
6 kids now. You had 4 when you moved here.
Yes.
2 were born in Texas.
That's right.
Well done, Jimmy. 6 kids.
I did tell you that I traveled with them for a year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome, actually. I know, and I want to ask you a few questions about that, but what are you optimistic about?
Well, the thing I'm optimistic about is that we are getting back to sound money. And wherever I see people getting into Bitcoin, I see them also getting into a lot of other things because they have what we call low time preference behavior. They're not discounting the future so much. The current fiat monetary system incentivizes very high time preference behavior where you value the present way more than the future. So you just YOLO and FOMO into everything and, get into sort of the hedonism that you were talking about. That's terrible for society. When you have a lot of high time preference people, civilization collapses because no one's there to maintain anything. No one wants to think about it. And in a very literal sense, that's true. You look at the houses that were built 100 years ago versus houses now, and you can visibly see this if you go to Buenos Aires. there are beautiful buildings from the Golden Age, La Belle Epoque, right? During the gold standard before World War I. And Buenos Aires was known as the Paris of South America. And in many ways, it's actually better. It's like cleaner, like nicer. But there's also architecture there that's very recent, and it's not built to last at all. And you could see that stuff crumbling. And this is what, high time preference behavior does, is that people don't build for the future. Even look at residential houses now. They're not meant to last more than 30 years. People used to build homes that would last hundreds of years in Europe. There are entire towns where all of the homes are from 200 years ago, and they've just upgraded it for indoor plumbing and electricity. I mean, that's how you build civilization. We're crumbling civilization because of fiat money. But because we have sound money, all those people that are getting into Bitcoin, I'm noticing that they value the future properly. So they do start families. They have more babies. They're looking to leave a legacy. They're building things for the future in a way that's sustainable and so on. That's how you make civilization better. I posit in the book that we might have peaked in 1969 when we landed a man on the moon. Because honestly, what have we done since then? And we haven't been back, right? Like I think the last moon landing was like 1972 or something like that. We have not been back. What does that tell you? It might be because, we're not interested, or maybe we don't know how to do it anymore, right? Like that's the really scary thing. Because original 747, conception to an actual plane being built that can fly it was like 2 years. The Boeing 747 MAX, it took like 10 years. What does that tell you? We don't have the talent that we did when the original Boeing 747 was built. This is happening. Like we've been going down. This is our one shot at sound money. Bitcoin is building that civilization, and that's why I think Bitcoin is the optimism that I see. It's the hope that we see.
Peter Zeihan wrote that book that everyone read. Based on his demographic analysis, he said that he thinks the peak was 2019. 1969 is not a peak you hear often. But if it's based on the moon landing, I suppose, I guess that might be one of the more exciting things we've done scientifically, technologically.
Well, it was the last time we pushed the frontier, because space really is the final frontier, right? Not to quote Star Trek too much. Have we gone past that? I mean, we've sent probes, but man certainly hasn't gone past the moon. I mean, I know Elon Musk is trying to land somebody on Mars, and we're talking about it. But honestly, if you think about what's happened since 1971 with the Nixon shock, the reason why we don't have talented engineers anymore and stuff is that they've all gone into rent-seeking. The best and the brightest since around that time have been going into investment banking. They're not going and building spaceships or new planes or, creating new ways to use nuclear power or anything like that. Those are the frontiers of science.
We've lost an elite class that used to go do crazy, awesome, ambitious things to rent-seeking. Horrifying.
More than horrifying, because the rent-seeking's been getting worse. It's gotten to the point where large portions of companies are rent-seeking, right? You have to comply to something, so some government bureaucrat will give you permission. So they take up a significant percentage of every company now. And it's a tax that everyone is paying, whether you know it or not. And this is one of the arguments that I give in the book about why people are having so few babies. Because you can't live on a single breadwinner anymore. We've gotten poorer since 1969.
So why'd you only have 6 kids? That wasn't enough, man. You could have gone 8, 9.
I wish I could have. Unfortunately, my wife's older than me, so there were biological considerations.
We're about to have our 3rd.
Very nice.
And my wife is done.
Really?
She's like, I don't want to be pregnant anymore. Yeah.
That must be devastating.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm as gung-ho as you are about having as many kids as possible, but it would be cool to have.
Okay, well, yeah, I do have a speech for wives that tends to work.
Let's hear it.
You want to hear it?
Yeah.
All right. So I say this usually when women are around.
I'll just play this while my wife's giving birth.
maybe a little bit after. But think about what you've done. right? Like, and I'm sure you've accomplished a lot in your career. I mean, various people have invented things, started companies, maybe even ruled over a bunch of people and so on. You've gotten into important positions, you've done whatever. You might have done a lot, but whatever you've accomplished, whatever things you've created does not compare at all to a human being. And guess what? Your wife has the ability to produce human beings. And in a sense, what men are trying to do is to catch up. Like, it's kind of unfair, really, because they can do this just biologically. And it is the most wonderful and amazing thing in human existence, is having children and propagating the species. Because without children, none of the other stuff that we do matters. Right? Without people, like, none of it matters. But they can do this. And it is a more noble thing than any man can do. And unfortunately, the modern liberal literati sort of like value system debases that.
Well, it's under the banner of environmentalism in a lot of the world. People claim that they don't want more kids because environmentalism, the calamities of global change or global warming, it's become a religious nightmare for people who hate the idea of having children, and it's a shame, and it's very scary. I like that speech, though.
No, it's true. And the thing is, like, before the advent of fiat money, motherhood was celebrated in every single culture the same way I'm speaking about it. They had a goddess of fertility in every religion, and it was to a woman's great shame if she couldn't have babies, and you can read about that in every culture. It was a big deal, and somehow it's become not a big deal through the advent of fiat money, where you get the daddy state taking care of you for everything.
I've seen billboards right outside my house, actually, on the street that say things like, it's okay not to have kids. And there's a website where you go and it just gives you like, it's all right if you don't want to have children. And I mean, I have a lot of friends that say they do not want kids. The thing about saying that you don't want kids, it's fine. Everyone should do what they need to do. And also, you don't want people to have kids when they don't want to have kids, because that's also problematic. But the problem is that these people are making the decision without knowing what it's like to have kids, because how could you know until you have kids? There's no explanation possible.
And also, it's a very sort of like high time preference way to think. Because right now it's very inconvenient. Certainly in their first few years of life, you're going to suffer. You're not going, like it's hard to get sleep. Your social life gets impacted significantly, and so on. But the thing is, you ask anyone that's 70 or 80, just talk to them for 5 minutes. They could have been like an astronaut or something, right? They don't care about any of that. What they care about, and this is from my parents, the only two things you care about like around that age is your own health, because obviously if you're really sick, it's going to suck, and your kids. Like, those are the only things that matter. You could have accomplished all kinds of things. No one cares, right? And this is the thing that really gets me about like these people that are going child free or whatever. It's like, okay, that is like very, very short-sighted. Like, yeah, you're gonna be able to travel, but really you're gonna want to travel when you're 52 and have arthritis, and all your friends have children, or you've lost contact with them and you're lonely and all that stuff. I mean, like, think for a second about your future self and love them a little bit more than you are right now, because in a sense, you're not looking at the full picture. And unfortunately, fiat puts us into that mindset of just thinking about now, because everything is about now.
You took your kids on the road, and you did like a year-long road trip with them?
Yeah, I did.
That's a dream of my wife, and I really want to do that one day.
I'll give you all the tips I have, because that was for me one of the things that I've really wanted to do, and something I was willing to spend my Bitcoin for. But yeah, it was amazing. We went for 277 days, 34 countries, every continent except Antarctica, and we had a great time. And it was a great way to see a lot of stuff. My wife hadn't traveled all that much until last year. She hadn't even been to Europe, for example. So it was really fun for her to go see a lot of these places. And we spent like 5 weeks in Rome. It was deeply meaningful for us to see a lot of religious art and things like that. We spent a couple weeks in Palestine and Israel, got to be in Bethlehem on Christmas Eve, which was really awesome. There were so many things that we're going to take back with us. And, under sound money, I'm going to bring it back to Bitcoin. I always do. I think these things used to be a lot more common. But because we're sort of enslaved to the fiat system where you have one employer or one customer, essentially, it's very difficult to get the time off to do that. And it's very hard to save for that because we're in debt up to our eyeballs. So to leave something means that you, first of all, don't have debt and have significant amounts of savings. Very few people are in that situation.
When I talk to you, it kind of feels, and I'm sure you know this, that you're like proselytizing for Bitcoin like it's a religion, right? More than you do for Christianity, which is your actual faith. Do you ever wonder about whether or not you should be doing more Christian missionary work versus Bitcoin? Like, where's the balance there?
Yeah, I mean, I have some thoughts on, how to do Christian evangelism. I think with Bitcoin, I can kind of go off in this direction, in part because I think it's less emotionally charged, let's say. With Christianity, it tends to be a lot more charged. And the strategy that I've used that has worked for me is just to let people know that I'm a Christian. All my friends know that I'm a Christian, especially in the Bitcoin space, and just sort of raise my flag. Hey, I'm a Christian. Come talk to me if you ever have questions or whatever. And they do. They seek me out, and I don't have to go and try to convert Sam Harris or something, right? Like that's not something that I'm interested in or something I would be successful at. But just sort of raising the flag and saying, hey, I'm a Christian, that tends to work for me. And that's the direction that I think God's put me towards, because sort of explicitly doing that, I don't know if that would work in the context that I live in. Whereas with Bitcoin and talking about savings and the corruption of the Federal Reserve and things like that, those things make sense to a lot of people. And I think they, in a sense, like feel it viscerally. And things are getting worse. Things are getting more expensive. Things are deteriorating. We're getting very little satisfaction out of the things that we're consuming. What is going on? And I try to explain that in the other books that I've written, and certainly this one, to sort of give voice to some of the frustrations that a lot of people are feeling.
So, is there a chance that Satoshi then is Jesus?
Yeah.
No, I'm just, because that's no. Honestly, like when you talk to people, I mean, look, you make rational arguments, and a lot of them make a ton of sense, and you can draw. Dude, we were talking about you road tripping with your kids, and you brought it back to how the fiat system has ruined.
Makes that impossible. Yeah.
Yeah, like you went back to that, and you're like, hey, man, if you just believed in Bitcoin, you could have the world again, and you could have aesthetic beauty, and you could be with your family, and you could travel, and like it really is like a religious construct.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a religious construct. I think there are specific steps to getting there, right? Like even in the ancient world, there were people that traveled for long periods of time. You think about the 7 wonders of the world, right? That was sort of like a travel log. Here are the things that you need to see before you die. And a lot of people like went away for a long time to go see this stuff and do that. That was normal back when they didn't have, the transportation options that we do now. Why is it that people don't take a year off and do stuff like that? So many people talk about it. So many people would love to do it, but why don't they? It's because they're in debt. It's because they don't have savings. Like these are obvious problems of the fiat monetary system. It lets you bring consumption forward through debt. You can get into eyeballs of debt as much as you want. In fact, most people do. And this is why you can't go and leave. I'm on a different standard. I'm on a Bitcoin standard. I'm able to do this in part because I was able to save, and I don't have a single employer, a single customer that keeps me sort of indebted to them and indentured to them, so I can do it.
You teach seminars. Does everyone pay you in Bitcoin?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
do you accept USD?
I usually charge a significant fee to take USD.
A true Bitcoin guy wouldn't, wouldn't accept USD. Come on.
Some of them, it's like, my company won't let me pay you in Bitcoin. Can I just pay you in PayPal with PayPal so I have a receipt that I can submit to some HR person? I'll let them do that, but I'll charge a hefty premium.
I'm going to start reading your books. Which one should I start with?
So for you, maybe the Little Bitcoin book. That's a good one to get started. It's very quick, and you can probably read it in one sitting, and it'll give you a good idea of some of the stuff that we talked about with like Navalny's organization and stuff. And that stuff is just,
It's powerful.
yeah, and it's everywhere.
And it's objectively positive. There's no rationalization that you can take to say that those types of groups shouldn't be funded. I mean, at least from the Western perspective.
Yeah, if you go outside the United States to the developing world, they all want dollars, and you have to understand that that's a form of oppression. It's a form of monetary colonialism, and it's something that a lot of people don't really realize. They think like the IMF and the World Bank and the Bank of International Settlements are all doing good for these countries. It's not. They're exploiting these countries. They're taking the resources of these countries. Like the entire concept of a banana republic exists for a reason. It was Chiquita Banana taking over Central American countries so they could grow them and import them to the United States and exploit the labor, right? Like there's a lot of things that we tell ourselves that we're a force of good when in fact that's not.
I spoke recently to someone who immigrated here from Mexico, and his response to the acquittal of Ken Paxton, our attorney general, was, I moved here because we didn't have rule of law in Mexico and because it was a banana republic. Now, doesn't even seem like Texas, the best state in the best country in the world, necessarily has its head on straight.
No, I don't think so. And that's to our detriment. This sort of fiat mentality has penetrated so deeply. And
so fiat's like Satan.
Well, fiat is the source of all of this
evil.
All of these distorted incentives, where you get a deep state, where you get a bureaucratic state, where you get just cancer growing all over the place. And that corrupts everything.
Do you see how the religious construct is coming out?
Yeah, it is. And hopefully you can read the book and
Dude,
see some of it. Yeah,
I'm right now very I'm like, damn, maybe I really should be allocating a certain percentage of my life to Bitcoin because of the things you're saying. But that doesn't mean that it's like any movement, right? You got Satan in the fiat and centralized authority, and then you have Satoshi. He's sort of like a Jesus figure.
Well, he just sort of disappeared very early.
Yeah, so he's a messiah. He might return. Like he went away, and then you have Bitcoin as the word of God. It's like the Bible. It's the Torah, right? And it's the way to defeat fiat, which is Satan. And if you have faith.
Well, I don't think you need faith. I think you just need to.
Don't you need faith for any currency?
Well, this is the thing. It's technologically easy to prove that it follows these rules. And if you think the rules are good, and if you study any Austrian economics, you'll quickly realize these are sound rules for sound money. Then you don't need faith. You need to trust the code, but you can go examine the code. It's all open source. You can go read it.
I haven't thought about it as religion before right now, actually. I thought most things I think of as religions, but the way you were framing it was like, got to be careful about the fiat, man. Basically, you're going to sell your soul to the fiat. We've all sold our soul to the fiat.
We've sold ourselves out. That's what a job is. It's just like sort of like being chained to a master. And it's I call it the golden handcuffs, right? Because they trap you with all of the conveniences of life, right? Especially if you're at a tech company. They'll cook for you. They'll do your oil change. They'll cut your hair. They'll give you, everything that you need so that you can be their best slave. This is so not in the spirit of like a free market, of entrepreneurialism. The only reason Google and Facebook are paying you these like enormous salaries is so that you don't go and do a startup that will destroy them. This has been their strategy, and they use fiat money to lure all these people so that they don't have the path to go challenge them.
What would you do if one of your kids got really into fiat, like just super...
Like an investment banker or something?
Yeah, they were like, man, I just love fiat. I just need fiat all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you joke about it, but when I see Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, that's what I think of, right? Like, he loves money, right? He'll call it a crime against money if you waste money, right? But that's somebody that I see as sort of like the antithesis of Bitcoin, like someone that is deeply in the fiat trenches. And, he uses his position to essentially rent seek. He wants the deals where he has to do as little work as possible, right? And you could see it, right? He's like, I want a 7% royalty, or I will give you a loan. You're going to pay me back triple, and I'm still going to get 10% equity, or some ridiculous deals.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever watched like a full episode of Shark Tank.
Yeah.
But I do know who Kevin O'Leary is.
I've seen him at the Bitcoin Magazine conference. He was like wearing a pink jacket and stuff. And he was like promoting some mining thing. And it's like so obvious he's like selling out to an altcoin. It becomes like second nature to these guys to go automatically for an altcoin. Mark Cuban did this. Kevin O'Leary did this. There was Kevin Harrington used to be on that show. He ended up doing this. It just like... It's second nature to these VCs to do it because they're so steeped in the fiat world.
I think that anyone who isn't a little bit afraid, at least a little bit afraid of centralized authority in the fiat and how ridiculous it all is, isn't thinking. And so, yeah, I'm like making fun of the construct and calling it religious or whatever, but it's fair when you start to think through these things. And I appreciate that you're so earnest and like you think really well about these things and you back it up with a lot of different... There's a lot of people in your world that don't do this as well as you do, and I guess that's why you're writing books. But yeah, maybe that's the next book should be like a guide for people who have already bought in and how to bring this to the world and be proper missionaries rather than what's happening now, which is a lot of people are being turned off by the hype cycles.
Yeah, and that's a fair criticism. And unfortunately, like there's a whole group of people that are focused on marketing and trying to almost trick people into Bitcoin. Oh, if you do this, then you'll get this or something like that. Certainly, like the price hype is very much like that. Oh, if you buy it and you'll get it, and then there are all these other cryptos or whatever, and that's fair. There is a certain amount of hype around that, which I think is extremely unhealthy and like antithetical to the cause. The thing that I try to focus people on is how fiat money works. And once you really understand how fiat money works, how money comes out of thin air. When you get a mortgage for your house, that money does not come from somebody's savings. It is printed on your behalf. It comes out of nothing, and this money just is there for you so you can go buy the house. That's how it works. How unjust it is, how corrupt it is. Once you really understand the current system, then Bitcoin starts making sense. And in many ways, this is very much like Christianity in the sense that until you understand that you're a sinner, Jesus Christ does not make sense. And that's the sort of like two parts that you need to really understand about Bitcoin as well.
Maybe like one more question about Christianity then. Your first memory in church was that Bible verse about temptation, right?
Yeah.
What is an example of temptation in your life that you've had to resist?
I think anything that distracts me from my mission. When people ask me about like how I organize my day or how do you have time for 6 kids or how are you doing this stuff, and I tell them pretty straight up, I have 4 things that are my priority. If it's not one of these, then I don't do. And it's all easy because they all start with F. So faith, family, fitness, and finances. If it's not one of those 4, I just don't do it. So the temptation for me is pretty much anything outside of that. And there are other Fs that tempt me greatly, like football and Facebook. There's lots of things that could, but I've chosen to cut a lot of that out of my life. And sometimes they'll suck me back in for a little bit, but then I know that it's not part of those 4 priorities. So yeah, I try to keep it to those.
Thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It was a fun conversation. It went in directions that I don't normally go in.